All right, hello and welcome to Oracle Data Guard using Grid to create a logical database. My name is Steve Hamilton and I'll be your instructor for this course. Please remember, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to use the question and comment box found below. Okay, let's get started. All right, in this module, we're going to look at setting up a logical standby database via the Grid. In the last module, we looked at creating a logical standby database by hand. And kind of there's a running theme here. We've looked at creating a physical standby database by hand, and then we've looked at a physical standby database via the Grid. Then we created a logical standby database by hand, and now we're going to create a logical standby database via the Grid. For my money, I prefer to do most everything by the Grid. And it's not because I don't understand what's going on behind the scenes. I've been doing Oracle DBA work for 15, 18 years. I grew up on command line. I know SQL Plus like the back of my hand. I know how to issue these things from the command line. One of the things is I'm just a very poor typist. So by doing this from the Grid, it just makes everything so much easier. I understand what's going on behind the scenes, but I can get it all knocked out in like 5 mouse clicks as opposed to typing in all of these other commands from the command line, setting up the environment variables, issuing the configurations. Are you going to have to do some configuration by hand, even within the Grid? Yeah, you are. Is it going to be automated with the Grid? Absolutely. Is it going to be a little easier through the Grid? It sure is. Is the functionality that you're going to get at the end of the day going to be the same? Yes, it is. Somebody once told me a long time ago, if there's a better way to do it, then do it. And then that is what the Grid does for you. So we are going to configure and create our standby database with the Grid. First of all, let's understand what a logical standby database is. A logical standby database is not the same as a physical standby database. A physical standby database is a bit-for-bit copy of the primary database. A logical standby database is not a bit-for-bit copy. The changes that are applied to the logical standby database are applied via a series of SQL statements, not necessarily DDL commands and the apply process. So logical standby is just a series of SQL statements that are applied from the from the primary system. A logical standby database can replicate table spaces, tables, as well as users. Okay. So it can replicate the entire production system or a subset of the production system. So we're going to use Grid to quickly and easily and efficiently create a logical standby database. We can do this all through the wizard. Grid will totally automate everything for us. And again, I cannot stress this enough. It's about 5 or 6 mouse clicks and you're done. The secondary database must already be available. What happens is really we are creating a physical standby database first and then converting that physical standby database into a logical standby database. Even within the Grid, when we go out and we say select a or create a logical standby database, it's going to create that logical standby database, but the first thing it does is it creates a physical one and then converts it to a logical database. So what we're going to do is we're going to log into our Grid. When we log into the Grid, we're going to log in as either an administrator or a super user, or an account that has the abilities to administer this specific database. We're going to go to the home page, and we see on the home page, like we already do, we see the summary information. I have 21 targets. Of those 21 targets, 75% of them are up and running. Not too concerned about this page. The next thing I'm concerned about is navigating to the targets page. When I navigate to the targets page, I can see that I have a database out there. That database out there is ORCL 11.2. Basically, this is an Oracle 11.2.2 database. It is currently up and running. In my Grid environment, I can see that I have 2 other databases out here, ORCL and ORCL1, that they are currently not configured. This one is 11.1.6 database. If I want to configure them, I'll select this and go up to configure and probably enter in the DB SNMP account. by entering the DB-SNMP account that will then register that database within the grid. But that's kind of neither here nor there. This is just kind of what I'm looking at. What I'm after is creating a logical standby database for this guy right here. I will then navigate to that specific database. And in that database instance, it gives me the summary information that this database is currently up and running. It's running on a Red Hat Linux environment. The version of the database is 11.2.2, and that database resides on the grid server. This is the listener that database is using. The performance tab is going to give me performance statistics. The server tab is going to give me backup and recovery information. The schema tab, the server tab is also going to give me table space control files and online redo logs. The schema information is going to give me information about specific schema accounts within this database. The data movement is going to enable me to perform not backup and recovery, but it'll perform export and imports. And the software and support is going to take me to the support workbench. To set up a data guard configuration, whether it be logical or physical, in a grid environment, I will navigate to Targets, Database, select that specific database, and then navigate to the Availability tab. When I navigate to the Availability tab, I can see at the top page I have the High Availability Console. The High Availability Console is the console that I can navigate to help manage my high availability architecture. I can manage my data guard, my RMAN, my clusters, all through my High Availability Console. I can look at the Maximum Availability Architecture, or the MAA. The MAA is going to give me advice as far as what do I need to configure to enable my system to meet the MAA criteria, or the maximum availability criteria. What I'm really after down here is I go to Data Guard. And under Data Guard, it's going to ask me to perform or to add a standby database. At this stage of the game, it doesn't care whether or not it's a logical standby database or a physical standby database. It's just saying, hey, add a standby database. So I'll come in and I will add a standby database. It will navigate me to the Add a Standby Database screen. This effectively is the Data Guard wizard that enables me to come in here and add a new standby database, whether it's a physical standby database or a logical standby database. I'll navigate to go to Add a Standby Database. I will be presented four options. I can create a new physical standby database, or I can create a new logical standby database. In this particular case, I'm going to choose to create a new logical standby database. Effectively, the steps are going to be almost identical between a physical standby database and a logical standby database. So I'm going to go over here and I'm going to say select create a new logical standby. When I create a new logical standby, I can see that my options are going to be the same. It says, do you want to perform an online backup by using RMAN? Or do you want to use an existing backup that you created within RMAN? Again, in this particular case, I'm going to have it perform a backup of the primary database right now and use that RMAN to create my logical standby database. Since I just did this, I could say use an existing primary database backup by using RMAN. It doesn't really matter, but effectively what I'm going to say here is just to be on the safe side, let's back up the primary and then use that primary as a source for my logical standby database. Now, because I'm doing a logical standby database, it will tell me, hey, these are the tables that are unsupported. So these are the tables that cannot be replicated to that logical standby database. So in this particular case, I can see that I have 22 tables that are not going to be supported for my logical standby database. Under the show command, I can show tables, tables only, as well as materialized views. Now I go to the backup options, and this is the same that I've pretty much seen within the physical standby database. It is going to say this is how we're going to perform the backup. What are the concurrent file copy processes? All this is asking me for is that how fast do I want to have the backup run? If you're on a multiple processing system, you can have this concurrent file copy process to be 2 or greater. The maximum number of file copies that you can have, or file copy processes, will be 4 times the number of CPUs. So, if you have a 2 CPU system, the maximum number of concurrent file copy processes will be 8. I don't ever advocate that you go over half of that. So if the maximum is 8, don't ever go above 4. I would say actually back that down to about 3. What this does will make the backup go a little bit faster. I have worked in environments that the number of file copy processes, if we set it to 1, it will take forever. If we set it for 2 or 3, it will have a significant impact on performance, on improving performance. These are the primary host credentials right here. It is then going to ask us for what is the instance name for the logical standby database. The instance name for the logical standby database is that we'll change it to whatever it is. Now it's going to default to the current instance name, but that does need to be changed. The storage, what is the storage, database storage for the logical standby database? Is it going to be file system or is it going to be ASM? In this particular case, we're just going to assume the defaults and allow it to be file system. We can see the standby database location is going to be on this host for this Oracle home. Typically, in a grid environment, you would put your logical or physical standby on a completely separate host, but in our particular case, I'm just showing you the demo purposes here, so we're putting this logical on the same host. It's going to prompt me for my standby host credentials, which is the operating system username and password for the standby host. It's then going to say, all right, where do you want to place your file systems, or where is the file system, the file is going to reside? We can see here that the total disk space for the standby database is going to be about 1.8 gig. The primary database is ORCL 112. The primary host is grid server. The secondary host or standby host is also grid server. The network files are going to go under Oracle Home Network Admin, and the listener home is going to be basically your Oracle home. Now, you have the option of changing the directory locations. The default directory locations on that standby host are going to be your Oracle base, Oradata, database name, file name. I suggest that you change that to whatever is going to be within your own organizational needs. In my case, what we have is we have a particular directory structure like U02 Oradata, U03 Oradata. So what you can do is you can say on your standby database, the data files will be located under /U02 /Oradata database name. And then if you hit go, they'll make that change for all of these data files. You can do that for data files, temp files, control files, and online redo log files. So what's happening behind the scenes, remember that parameter is called db file name convert and log file name convert? That's exactly what's going on here. The primary database location is U03 app ORCL 12. The standby location is would be like U02 Oradata, whatever. I mean, that's just an example. The db file name convert, the first entry would be this, the second entry would be this. I highly recommend that you do this. I mean, this is one of the things that you probably need to change when you go through the wizard. It's just the location of the data files on the standby system. And again, like I said, you can do that for temp files. We can also do this for online redo log files. These files right here are your standby log files. So you can do it all at once by specifying the default location right here as well as right here and hit go, and it will apply to all of the log files as well as all of the temp files. You can specify the control files, and then if you want, you can look at your directory objects and modify those as well. Typically, I don't modify these. Now, this is true for both a physical standby database and a logical standby database, that you can change the default locations for the data files. I just didn't show that on the physical side, but we can do the exact same thing for physical as well as logical. And what we're doing is just changing the default location for the data files for that logical standby system. Then here, we're going to specify our database parameters. We've specified our database parameters, and we've given it our database name, our database unique name, as well as our target name, as well as our standby archive location. So we can see here that the steps are going to be pretty much the same. All we do is we come in here and we say we're going to create a logical standby database. Now, the difference between creating a logical and a physical, it did come back and say, hey, these tables are not going to be supported within the logical standby configuration. The reason that those tables may not be supported is they probably had an unsupported data type, or maybe they were some sort of materialized view or materialized view log. But nonetheless, it came back and it told us out of the gate these certain tables would not be supported. Everything other than that was pretty much identical to creating a physical standby database. So now I'm going to go ahead and hit next. Oh, before I hit next, the one thing I want to step back here and show is there's two things. Is make sure that you're going to monitor this configuration, say use sysdba monitoring credentials. What this means is that the only people that can monitor this particular data guard configuration is a member of sysdba. If you want somebody other than sysdba to monitor it, you would check this box and say use non-sysdba credentials and provide that username and that password. And this would be an Oracle username and password. Also, you have the ability to configure the standby database connect identifier. And here we're going to say use the enterprise or manager connect descriptor, or you can use another net service name. It's totally up to you. But make sure that you check this box, use sysdba monitoring credentials. Now, if you want to use like the sys account or your own DBA account, you would check this box and then provide your own username and password and confirm the password. So now, what we see is that we have our primary database is this. Our secondary database is this. The database names are the same. The instance names are going to be the same. The database versions are the same. Now you'll notice over here, the standby type, it's going to be identified as a logical standby database. Okay, so the database version is the same, operating system's the same, operating Oracle Home the same. Now the Oracle Home doesn't even have to be the same. Remember, this was on a different server. If this Oracle Home was on U02 versus U03, that would be just fine. But now we're going through the little summary information. It says everything here looks fine. If it didn't look fine, we click back, make the appropriate change, go ahead and hit finish. Before we went ahead and hit finish, what we want to make sure is that the storage parameters are set, so we can see that the data files are here, and then they're going to point to over here. The log files are here. They're going to point to this directory structure. Again, I will tell you from practical experience, it's probably best practices to make sure that you change the data file locations. Because you're moving to a new server, the odds are the directory structures are not going to be the same on that new server as they are on the old server or on your production system. So, highly recommend that you do make those changes. Here we can see that the new locations of the control files, as well as any sort of external files and the directory objects. Again, I would tell you that you don't particularly have to worry about your directory objects and external files. You will have to worry about the naming locations for data files, control files, online redo log files, and temporary files. Okay, you hit finish, and lo and behold, we're creating a little job that's going to do the exact same thing for you. It's going to update the data guard configuration. It's going to prepare a standby database creation job. It's going to submit the job, and we're going to add that standby database target. So at the end of the day, we're going to see that we have a brand new logical standby database on our system. So going through the wizard, really walking through the wizard is about a 15-minute process tops. Okay, you walk through the wizard, 15 minutes, you make everything sure is fine, you click go, It will automatically create that logical standby configuration for you. You get up, go grab a cup of coffee, come back in about 45 minutes to an hour, depending upon how long it takes to copy the files and create the backups and do all those things. You've got a full-blown logical standby database created. Keep in mind, we can use a logical standby database to replicate certain things like a table space, a user, or an individual table. A logical standby database is not a bit-for-bit copy of the production system. That's what you use a physical standby for. Why we would use a logical standby database, it would really only be for one of these reasons. Most organizations will typically use a physical standby database because they want to make sure that they have an exact copy of production in the event of some sort of major disaster. Do you have any questions? Please remember, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to choose the question and comment box found below. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for viewing this course. We value your opinion. Please select the course survey link from the related links section on this course page to take the short survey.